Hello, everyone. NWE War Reports here with another 20th March 2023 frontline update. This is going to focus primarily on Bakhmut and the developments in that area. So, last we left off, I believe we had talked about some ground gained here in the southern part of the city, and then also some ground gained on the flanks in this area. There's been a lot that's happened since this has gone on. We have a couple areas where Ukraine has actually taken back ground, a couple areas where um, we probably just misjudged the front line in general that we're going to correct, and a couple more areas of Russian advance. So to first start and talk about the Russian advances, this sector here you see where this icon says Real Blood, this industrial zone in area up to the train tracks has now fallen into Russian hands, according to recent reports. So we're going to mark this area here now as under Russian control. Okay. And then the next sector that has fallen into Russian hands is the area to the south of the city going up to Mariupolska Street, which is this avenue that runs through here. It's one of the more main central transportation arteries. Really, it kind of just carries traffic into the southern part of the city, as you can see here, and down to Klishchivka. So that avenue is now under threat. You have a territory that um, essentially looks like this. That is under Russian control now here. So as you can see, gains being made there. And then to correct what's going on here while we're in this area, it appears like the front line isn't nearly as advanced forward as what I've projected here. That is my mistake. We are going to retract it back some. As you'll remember, we were talking about battles in the area of the stadium. The Russians did not manage to capture the stadium at this point. It seems like the Ukrainians have forced them back out of these warehouses and stuff in this area. In terms of these areas to the south of here, really unsure of their status. So we're just going to retract that back here. And then according to most mapping accounts, they're showing that this park is still under Ukrainian control. So we're also going to retract these lines back here just slightly. If you remember, a couple days ago, there was a large territory that was captured by Russia. It was essentially both of these neighborhoods right here. Well, we're gonna leave this top corner of this neighborhood within Ukrainian control still. So that is the front lines within Bakhmut right now. You have heavy fighting both to the north and to the south, as well as along the river line towards the center of the city. However, it's unclear if the Russians have broken through there and out into the center of the city. In terms of the flanks, we do have word of another development, more ground captured in the direction of Vasilivka. So we're actually going to correct the lines here as well. It appears that I more or less had drawn like a general line here. It seems like for the most part, Orekovo Vasilivka itself is in under Ukrainian control at the moment. But Wagner forces have moved forward another tree line and are getting pretty close to both Orekovo Vasilivka from the south and to Grigorovka from the north. In fact, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if it was the case that Wagner was actually pretty well positioned, if not fighting over this forested area here. It seems like that's probably a big likelihood at this point. All right, so there is a zoomed out view of Bakhmut, all the fresh gains, all the changes on the map. Real quick, now we're going to talk about Ukrainian counterattacks. So in this area to the south, Ukraine has managed to free up its southern flank a bit. In this area, they're actually facing off against a Russian Guards Airborne Division, is what's fighting here in the south. This actually isn't Wagner forces; it's Guards Airborne. So, elite of the elite for Russian troops. Not quite, like Spetsnaz or anything, but very effective, seasoned combat veterans. And the Ukrainians have cleaved off parts of both of these forested areas here. Actually, I think it's probably fair to zoom in here, and it's looking like more or less they've retaken this hilltop in this area here. So zooming out real quick to more or less show you guys kind of the area we're talking about. This is the area that has fallen back into Ukrainian control. So, the Ukrainians pushing the Russians out away from Chasiv Yar some. There is possibility that some of these forested areas are still under Russian control, and that I've overextended and been a little too generous with this area, but that's all right. I mean, sometimes we end up being too generous with giving claims to the Russian side. We try to be as accurate as we can, and we try to fix the front lines whenever we make mistakes. So, for the rest of this video, we'll talk about some of the other news in Ukraine. We're going to go to the live UA map and see what's going on there in terms of fighting on the front. Not a lot of markers. Not any markers actually from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, with the AK-47 showing that there's Russian assault operations. I think the main reason for that being is the primary areas of Russian assaults, both in Bakhmut and Avdiivka. I think these are the only two areas that saw combat activity on the Russian side today, and they very much did not go in Ukraine's favor. So, in terms of when Ukraine usually gives these reports, they state these are all the places that we repulsed Russian assaults. There was movement, there was activity, but it doesn't seem like any of the assaults were repulsed. And if you guys will, go on to the YouTube page and YouTube profile for NWE War Reports, there's a video out today about the situation in Avdiivka. Very interesting events going on there. A very bad situation for Ukraine in Avdiivka. So make sure you go watch that video as well. So essentially, we're looking at just shelling, on different parts of the lines. There's the Chinese president Xi Jinping is in Moscow today. Doesn't look like there's an icon about that. Yeah, there might be. There we go. No, it's not it. No, a lot of speeches were made today by Vladimir Putin. One interesting thing that I do want to gloss over real quick was a letter was sent to Defense Minister Shoigu from Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is the leader of Wagner private military contractor. And he was saying that Wagner now controls 70% of the city of Bakhmut, but in the near future, the Ukrainian army plans to launch a large-scale counteroffensive. All measures should be taken to help prevent enemies' plan from being realized. So, we've talked about this some in previous videos about how Ukraine has staged a large force, probably, anywhere from 50 to 70,000 troops in this part of the line. Who really knows? And I've stated my skepticism of any kind of Ukrainian counteroffensive in this area repeatedly. There has been Ukrainian offensive activity on the Zaporozhye front with any big gains so far. That's just started up. They've just started being active down here very recently. There have been some statements. Interestingly enough, I think the statement was from the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic claiming that Ukraine essentially had one chance at a counteroffensive before funds would run out and support would run out for Ukraine. So, they needed to launch a counteroffensive in the spring, and it had to be successful because if it failed, it was very likely that Western governments would give up on the funding in the war in Ukraine, which, I don't know if that's true or not. That was just the statement that was made. He had said that after next winter, it would be virtually impossible to continue, um, supporting Ukraine with the same amount of money that we're currently doing. Of course, you have like different things going on right now, like the banking. It seems like a new banking crisis is brewing up. Some big banks in America, semi-big banks in America, the two top 20 size banks have collapsed in the last week or so. In a couple other smaller ones collapsed, and then you have a lot of trouble with Credit Suisse, which is a huge, ginormous bank based out of Switzerland, and we'll see essentially what happens there. It seems like they're going to get a cash injection from the Swiss National Bank, but whether or not that's gonna do the trick and stop the crisis, who knows? But long story short, there's some risk for Ukraine in terms of financials in the West. There's not a guarantee that support will be infinite. I've said this from the beginning. Like Ukraine, time is against Ukraine, so. I don't think any of this bodes well. So we probably will see Ukrainian attack soon. Where it's going to be, I don't believe any of this stuff. I think that Zaporozhye, at least the area of Arekiv, is far too telegraphed. I think that in terms of attempting anything in the Bakhmut area, I mean, Russia just has far too many resources in this area. Um, for it to be successful. I mean, and I was going over this yesterday. I can actually I'll pull up my notes for you guys, for any of you guys that wants to read them. But let's go ahead and shrink this down, move it over here. And these two areas right here, this list, these are all of these units that are marked here. And it's about, I mean, there's well over 100,000, 120,000 Russian troops in between Bakhmut and Kreminna. And most of these units in Kreminna are not engaged. They're just sitting back waiting. So I don't think that this is the type of area that Ukraine can successfully launch a counteroffensive. As per why Prigozhin is sending letters out like this, I mean, it's all probably part of the information game. Like both sides are playing an information game. I mean, you'll remember last year with Ukraine's counteroffensives, like they weren't like everyone kind of went into it thinking it was telegraphed because they were talking about like, oh, the Kherson offensive, Kherson offensive, Kherson offensive. Like everyone remembers like how hyped up it was, and then out of nowhere, the Ukrainians attacked Kharkiv, right? Like there was some talk and some Russian channels that were talking about Ukrainian buildups in the areas, but I think the Russian high command misjudged the situation and probably assumed that this was the information operation to try and draw them away from Kherson, but it turned out to be the opposite. Well, now we're in a situation where there's clearly one area that is vulnerable for Russia in the war. That is the Zaporozhye front. It is the most vulnerable point, I will say. Maybe not in terms of like how weak Russia is on the front line. Like they do have lower amounts of strength there, but like should the Ukrainians be successful in cutting this land bridge here, it would really isolate Crimea and actually threaten the Russian state. So like that would be a great negotiating position for Ukraine to force the Russians out of more areas. Perhaps, maybe, who knows. But I'm curious to see if Ukraine might decide to strike elsewhere, somewhere maybe where the Russians aren't expecting it, which who knows where that could be. All right, guys, that's it for me today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.